I like these conversations to be impromptu, casual,
Yeah.
and it's just about the conversation. So
Yeah, that's fine.
And just let you go and explain libertarianism, because I kind of wanted your take on it, because you sort of have it's closer to you than it is to me.
Well, okay. Have you started the thing yet?
Yeah, it started.
Okay. So, why don't you tell me, like, you're asking me about libertarianism. What's your position? Like, where am I talking to you on this? Like,
Okay.
are you?
Well, here's the thing that I one of the things that I think we kind of get stuck in is like it's an either or situation. And libertarian in a sense is asking, hey, I want to have as much freedom as possible.
Yeah.
Some people may not want that much freedom. Some people may want more security. It's kind of like an insurance policy, if you will. But how do you balance libertarian ideals with maybe other people more socialistic or community ideals? Or you see what I'm saying? I think there can be a balance between the two, and I'm just trying to understand what is acceptable libertarian. What are you trying to tell me to do, and what am I trying to tell you to do? Because really, that seems to be one of the problems.
Well, I think the most basic principle of a libertarian philosophy is, anybody who espouses that is, don't steal my stuff.
Right. Yeah, which is reasonable.
Don't interfere with me physically, or molest me, or break into my house, or whatever stuff a person has, which is the product of their career, their life, their work, and so on. If I manufacture furniture, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say was the one thing I see when someone says that, I say, but your ability to be free is based on the foundation of a society you have the fruits of, right? I mean, we have roads, we have, education. These are things that you got, they didn't magically occur. I mean, there was a pre-existing condition that made that possible for you to be productive. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would say that is the condition that did exist. I wouldn't say it's an absolute necessity, because you can have a productive society that emerges from different starting conditions.
Certainly.
Yeah. Certainly. So the argument then is that the libertarian point of view, which is, hey, don't touch my stuff, or don't interfere with my farming or manufacturing or whatever it is you're going to be doing. The argument then is, yeah, but you used the roads, which we all paid for with our taxes, and you used the city's hydroelectric power, blah, blah, right?
Right.
Well, okay, all debts must be paid. So if you used something, you have to pay for it. And in a sense, all the stuff that is the product of sort of a municipal or a provincial or a federal government infrastructure, hydroelectric power, etc., driving on roads and so on, that is paid for. We are all paying for it. The transition, if you're going to have a transition to a more libertarian society, is just, we used to do it that way, now we do it this way.
Well, okay, so we see it. There can be a transition to that. So one of the thoughts I always had was, well, I mean, the experimentation, like, for example, you want to have a more libertarian system. I mean, why can't we have both? I mean, say, separate the two, say, okay, you're not going to pay taxes here, here, and here, but if you have X problem, you're going to have to pay out of pocket. Like, we look at an insurance model type of thing.
Well, this is a conceptual or a comprehension problem for a lot of people, even libertarians, is the idea that we're somehow going to go, yesterday we had a liberal government, we're in Canada here, which did all the following things, and today we're going to have this new libertarian system, as if you're going to just go turn a switch and have it happen. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a period of a year. It's not going to happen in a human lifetime. It's going to have to happen very gradually and slowly, mostly because if you had a magic wand and you could make big government just go away somehow, woohoo, magic, everybody around you, in the absence of government that they had up until that moment, would immediately drop what they were doing and create a new government to replace it. So it's not just that we don't like the system we're in. It's most people don't even comprehend living in another way. They can't even grasp that concept. So people have to be able to understand a way of ordering their lives and their culture and their neighborhoods and so on, other than the way that they do it now, which is a massive struggle.
Yeah, in some ways, I'd almost say it's a moot point. I mean, libertarianism is in some ways a moot point in a sense that we have technological advances that are more pressing, more radical than the libertarian mindset. But that's where I'm coming from. I see technology coming down the road. I'm thinking, but in some ways, I guess we have to address it ideologically. It's more important that we be able to think about another way of living anyways. I don't know how to describe that. Do you look at technology and think, well, how is that going to influence, hurt, or help libertarian ideals?
I don't think it's a direct relationship. Technology in a culture that has abundant energy is going to continue to increase, regardless of what your political system is. Whether
Right.
you in a collectivist socialist system or a highly individualistic style of government or whatever, if you have an abundance of resources and energy, your technological level is going to continue to increase.
Okay. So this is kind of how I'd phrase that question then. What is it that you need in society so that that is so pressing upon you that you feel it has to change for you to be happy? I mean, would be one way to look at it.
I'm happy now. I'm not trying to change other people's minds. I used to be like outwardly facing activist trying to change, the way we do things in, say, the family courts or what have you. I don't really have a horse in trying to change other people's minds anymore. I'm not sure if you've followed the evolution of it. I mostly identify myself as part of what is called loosely MGTOW, men going their own way,
right?
Which is all of the sort of activism element of the men's movement, all the different things they wanted to get changed in society. MGTOW changes all of that immediately for the individual.
Right.
Like, I'm not trying to fix it for anybody else anymore. I fixed it for me. With some sacrifice, you have to have some discipline, and then you become an example. So other people see you, and you go, "Well, I like the way that guy has got his life sorted out. I think I'll do that too." That's the only part of the activism, that's changing other people's minds, and it's an incidental byproduct. So I don't need the world to change for me to be happy. It's just, I think it would work better and everybody would be happier if,
Well, I actually do agree with you that I think the best way to go about it is to do it by example. I mean, and I think that you can do it on an individual level means that you have a more, it's easier to do. So, I mean, I can't argue with someone on that level. It's like, if you're saying, hey, it's for me, this is the way I want to live life. This is how it works for me. These are the types of things I run into. This is how I deal with them. That's, you can't argue with that. I think we all need to realize that.
Yeah. The other sort of conundrum element of a libertarian philosophy is that you can't impose it, because as soon as you impose it, you're not a libertarian anymore. You can't force anybody to be a libertarian, because now you're not a libertarian.
Well, in a sense, right? You sort of have to deal with that thing. What I was looking at was ethics in general, and I sort of run up against libertarian thinking in the sense that if you start from a want-based ethical framework, if you think about it, we have been always using a command-based ethical framework, not based on what other people want, but this idea that there is this ideal thing that is the right thing to do, instead of asking, well, what is it that you want to achieve? Do you see how I'm going with this at all?
Yeah, that's where you start creating a societal structure or a rule set based on an ideological principle of the architect of that rule set, which is how we mostly live now.
Right.
And not letting people individually go, well, this part of your little plan I don't dig, and this other part I'm going to change to that. You can't really do that in any significant way in the present system, unless you are prepared to basically go outside the boundaries of normal behavior, and be prepared for people to ostracize you because you're a weirdo.
Yeah. So this is what it's boiling down to. I think you understand the rule set concept, but one of the things that I think we're not doing is we don't have a feedback system, which I think in a libertarian system, it sort of lends itself to it. There's that feedback, natural feedback mechanism.
Yeah, because people will either deal with you or not based on, how you conduct yourself.
Right. Well, it's one of the things I ran into, though, with some libertarians was the idea of compassion. Why compassion is a necessary ingredient. Do you understand one of the factors in compassion, why it's a necessary ingredient?
I don't think you've really framed a question that I can answer. What's the question?
Okay. Well, the reason I bring it up is people are going to do things that are going to be the derails. They're going to do something really wrong, and they're going to get in trouble for it. The question, it doesn't matter, murder, robbery.
Okay, so criminal or antisocial behavior. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So how do you deal with that person, such that either A, you get rid of them completely, kill them, or you incorporate them back into society? You still have to deal with people at some level. What kind of system or mechanism do we deal with when people go off rails?
This is a really broad category of questions, not just a single question. And I think one of the places to start is with competition in rule enforcing agencies or grievance resolution organizations. Or dispute resolution organizations. So if you look at the present police, which is the state's enforcement, it's our society's way of enforcing the rules or the laws, but they enforce a lot of stuff that aren't laws, that are just sort of like, this is normal behavior and you're outside the bounds and you got to get back to coloring inside the lines. There's one enforcement body, and that's the police, and whether it's in a municipal police force or a federal or what have you. I think in a more ideological libertarian framework, you'd have competing dispute resolution organizations, and you'd have individuals in their contract law choosing which DRO to use, and in terms of where they lived, in terms of sort of the law of the land, I can't, knock over a newspaper box or break a car window because this particular enforcement body or dispute resolution organization operates on the following rules. And if I don't like those rules, then I need to go where a set of rules exist that I find more agreeable. But that doesn't work, that I'm going to go where the rules suit me, doesn't work where you have, number one, a unified, everybody has the same rules, and you have national boundaries that are difficult to cross without like a lot of money and passport and foofara to get through it. So the libertarian answer becomes much more nuanced in that the large state is a problem, the one enforcement body is a problem, and I know that people listening to this are going to go, well, you want to be able to break windows or commit some sort of antisocial behavior. I don't at all. I just think that your choices in how you live and what rule set you think is socially useful doesn't have a lot of flexibility right now in a unified system.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the unified system is a little bit of a problem. I mean, there needs to be, from if you're going to be negotiating across borders, you know, you're going to have cross-border rules, you know, and sometimes it's like, hey, we don't want to work with you because you're throwing acid in the face of women. Use that as an example.
Or even something, as soon as you throw like something extremely egregious like that, it distracts people. So I think that kind of discussion is more easy to understand when you talk about something a little bit more mundane. Like,
Right.
you don't like the way you price your timber products, or right, which is, it's not such a screaming hair on fire issue, but
Right.
in terms of how you run a society, it is a serious issue that people are going to have a big disagreement over.
Right. Well, and so yeah, at a certain point, you're going to say, I'm not going to work with you because you're not playing by the same rules that I'm playing with, and I can't negotiate with you because you're outside of my rule set, which is fine. Yeah. I think the flexibility is what I was looking at too, and that's why I come back to libertarian and say, now the thing I have that I worry about is accountability, meaning if you're using someone else's tools or using, you know, mixing and matching the rules on the fly to benefit you without realizing, hey, you didn't really pay for that service, or are you using someone else?
That's where you have to distinguish between anarchy and chaos, right? Anarchy is no rulers, chaos is no guidelines at all. So it's not like you don't have rules. It's not like you have a group of people who are, yeah, it's okay to steal other people's, you know, tools and equipment and supplies. Humans don't operate like that. And if you found a group who were like that and you went and operated amongst them, then your stuff would get stolen too. So I think that's kind of a self-solving problem. Any society with a rule set like that isn't going to work.
Right. No, and I and that's important to realize, that those rules they're not going to be self-sufficient. Or they'll destroy themselves just by basic logic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that. I think we'd probably agree on a lot of the nuance of the rules, just because rules are kind of self-reinforcing at a certain point.
Yeah.
You know, but it's the cross-border rules that kind of are like, well, we do have to have cross-border rules. Just
why though?
Because what you do across the border does have an effect on me, whether I like it or not. I mean, if you're using all the fossil fuels up, you're pumping it into the air. I mean, those are cross-border concerns.
Yeah. But then you're, whatever you call it, your city state or your organization or your provincial territory, or you know, this farming community versus that logging community, and they're next to each other. Their conduct as communities or as economic organizations has the feedback mechanism of the other organization's willingness to deal with them.
Well, another thing I think about in terms of that, and the economics I'm not too worried about, but the maximizing of human potential is another. It's a benefit. Some groups would want to maximize the human potential of someone, but there's a cost in doing that. So
what does that mean, though? Maximizing.
Well, and that's in terms of education is an example of maximizing someone's potential or creativity, creating an environment where they have where they can grow creatively. Like if you looked at an artist colony, for example, there's a huge expense in terms of doing that. And if someone can siphon off the creative talent from that group without actually paying back to the group, which I sort of see YouTube sort of is a classic example of that. Talent, there's a lot of talent out there, but there's no economic,
there's no economic trade-off to the actual producers of content.
Right.
Well, there is a little teeny little bit, but not much, not really enough to justify it. So, I think that's a self-solving problem too.
Do you?
I think it is, because in let's say, I mean, there are other video sharing communities besides YouTube,
Sure.
and some of them have much better monetization or profit generating tools for the content producers than YouTube does. I think you're on YouTube and I'm on YouTube, and I had my videos monetized for a short period of time, and I found that it put ads on the video, so it made the content I was producing, it encumbered it with advertisement, and I didn't really get anything out of that. I didn't make any money, so I demonetized because I'm not on YouTube to make money. I do other things to make money. If I was doing these videos primarily for a profit or for some sort of revenue generating activity, I would not be on YouTube. I'd be somewhere else, and there's lots of different options for me. Or I'd have a Patreon account.
Right. Not to say there's not other avenues for doing it. It's sort of something we'll have to see, because and there seems to be some change along that way, and there has to be change, or people will stop doing it and the content will just continue to go down.
Yeah.
There won't be a real creativity going on. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. So it's kind of a work in progress, I guess. I really can't really complain a lot about libertarian ideals. Who doesn't want to be, have freedom to express themselves?
Well, I think where we do get into a complaint is from, and I'm going to argue against libertarianism here, even though I am libertarian, is that if I opt out of the existing system and I find a way not to have the government steal my money, which is how I see taxation. Now, I know everybody thinks, oh, you're paying for your use of the system. No, I'm being stolen from, whether I use the system or not. There's lots of things that I don't use. For example, I don't use any of the infrastructure for cars. I ride a bicycle on the road, but I don't need a 20-foot wide paved thing. It's hugely expensive, difficult to maintain, and costs endless amounts of dollars, displaces green space, displaces pedestrian traffic, displaces housing. I ride a bike in a city, and I'm perfectly content to keep doing that till I fall off my bike and they bury me in a little hole. And that's just one example. There's like all this money that gets taken from people in their income, and most people don't use very much of that, the supposed services that are paid for with that. And of course, because the people administering how that money gets spent are not directly paying for it themselves, there's a huge amount of slop and waste. I would much rather pay for services I use directly.
And yeah, and I actually agree. That's a good example of one of the things that I agree with. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I am back. In terms of waste, that is a huge problem, and it's one reason we need to address it in some way.
Now, in terms of, I talked briefly about everybody, if we got rid of the government, we would create another one overnight, because that's how people are socialized. I think a way to step towards a libertarian world and not freak everybody out too much is change the tax and service structure system so that you have basically, we're all moving towards ID card type social identity anyway, where I have a driver's license, and now my driver's license in Canada incorporates my medical service plan stuff. We're going to see more and more integration of services into your digital or physical ID. What if your tax bracket that you chose, right? I make X amount of dollars per year, and so I go onto a government website, or I fill out a form and I say I'm going to pay this particular suite of taxes, which means I have access to this particular suite of services. I get roads, everybody gets roads, that's a basic part of it. I don't think I want medical because I'm going to take care of that myself. I don't need this, I don't need that. And then when I want to use a service, I engage using my identity that they can go, well, this guy is paying for these particular services, there he has free access to those. We would see a consumer-driven change in the way governments provide services, so that there would be less services for those for things that nobody really uses or that has a sparse level of use, and then that would have to become more efficient. So the way that those rarely used services got provided, got created, would have to become more efficient. The waste would disappear. And then you wouldn't have people like me complaining, well, why am I paying taxes for all this crap I don't do?
Yeah, well, that becomes more of a, like you say, a leaderless government at some point, because then we're having to get into the minutia of where our money is going, which is not something we do right now.
And that we don't do it is why we get shafted.
Well, that's true. That's exactly the point, is that we do need to be more aware of where the money goes, and we should have a vote. And I mean, I can envision, you have your profile, what you're against, what you're for, and basically a politician, whoever is going to negotiate with you, they're going to come and say, hey, look, this is what we need. Can we get a bunch of people on board with this? We want to pay for this particular thing. And you can go and check a box, say, yeah, I approve that now, or no, I don't approve that. I've changed my mind on that particular position. It'd be interesting. I think it is worth an experiment at least.
I would love to see politicians have to get financing for everything they do. Like, I want to do some project, and I don't just get to go to the government stream of money and just do it and go, haha, see, you elected me with a majority, so you can't stop me now. that every single project they do, they had to get approved and funded for the way private business does, the way a private individual does. If I want to create a men's shelter in Vancouver, I have to go somehow find funding for that. And right now there isn't a public will to have a men's shelter, and that's evident because I can't get funding for it.
Well, and that's it would sort of making people aware of what they're paying for is something that I think is a part of the problem. It's kind of like we don't really want to know how the sausage is made, right? You're not going to go through the steps.
I do want to know.
Yeah, and we should want to know, really, but we should make it as easy as possible, and that's where that's where design comes into play. I mean, we actually make laws more complicated than they need to be, so as to obscure the actual benefit or harm.
The other thing is, I want to see competition in all services, like all of the things that we think of as this is gravity, this is just always there. For example, the money. I would like to see competing currencies inside one country. In fact, the concept of countries starts to disappear when you begin doing things like that.
Yeah, I can see borderless. I can see a borderless situation where you have your online profile, and in some ways that determines the service. When you buy something at a store, you may pay a higher tax for that simply because you've made certain agreements that you're going to pay for this and that. Other people may pay a lower bracket because they're basically subsidizing that in another way. I mean, it's very possible. And so your money, what you pay for something, is based on your personal preferences that you've chosen. That'd be interesting.
I think that in the idealistic libertarian world, you have this free-for-all where everybody is all just unicorns and rainbows and happy and joy. That's not realistic. But what is realistic, and this is, maybe a failure of imagination, but maybe just because we've done this as a human species before and we know how well it works, is the collapse of the large government and the return to some modern version of a city-state, or a even smaller than a city. I mean, city-states in the medieval period were much smaller than what we now think of as a major metropolitan center in terms of population. So a neighborhood state, right? where we have the following rules, we have the following taxes, we have the following assumptions about the way you do business. And when you enter and leave those regions, you know that in this city-state, there is a tax that pays for, I don't know, water distribution or something like that, and that affects the prices of everything. And they don't accept whatever currency. So, you're going to have more thinking all the time in terms of who you're dealing with, how you're dealing with them, what are the assumptions in a transaction. So it becomes, you're not just blindly sleepwalking, taking a piece of paper out of your wallet and paying for something in a trance. You have to be thinking all the time. But I think that would be good for people.
Well, that's, I think unfortunately there's a whole education curve in terms of understanding responsibility that,
yeah, we're not socialized to understand that right now because we live in this top-down nanny state, essentially.
Right.
But, when the rules radically change and then you don't adapt to them fast enough, you will learn very fast what the new rules are. So that's just a learning curve, and there may be a little bit of skinned knees along the way.
Well, I mean, that's where I really think you can do this in a trial basis. I mean, I really think it should be looked at just in terms of tweaking the rules, understanding how these rules will actually work in practice. So creating small communities, libertarian communities that kind of play around with some of these ideas, and maybe a state that some developing country that wants to play around with libertarian rules to see what can happen. Yeah. Because I mean, it is interesting.
I'm going to go back to something you said, is that the elimination of borders. I ideologically love the idea of eliminating borders, but from a practical perspective, I see why we need them. One of them is you've got to control pest crops. You've got to control parasites. You've got to control invasive species in your agricultural practices. You also want to control if you have a business district, a business region, and we call it, say, I'll just call it Vancouver, with Vancouver becomes a city-state, then we want to know who's bringing timber, who's bringing wood product into and out of our business region, and we don't want to have, like someone flooding the market with a fake product or one that's going to degrade the quality of the business. That's why you need borders, for all those kind of business climate control reasons. So I would love to say no borders and we just go wherever we want, whenever we want, no matter what, including into other countries. But I see the practical necessity of having borders.
Well, I think too, though, borders are a choke point for product moving across certain points, like you said. It's a way of tracking, and this is something that I think transparency is important, and some people, well, it's an invasion of privacy. I'm like, there's privacy and then there's transparency, and there's some things we don't need to know, and those things we don't want to know probably anyways. But if we know where goods and services are going, then we can pretty much say, okay, this came from there, that came from there.
Yeah.
And so the borders actually are ideological, and you track them from any point to any point.
The privacy issue is another one. We are increasingly living in a society where we don't actually have privacy. We sort of have this quaint, nostalgic idea of what privacy is, which comes from previous generations when we didn't have all this technological connection. Like, you're watching me in my living room here on a camera on my laptop, and the difference is that when you're watching me with the camera, the little light turns on and I know the camera's on. There's lots of people who can turn the camera on my computer who don't turn the light on to let me know, including different enforcement agencies of my own government and foreign governments. So, I'm not sure that the privacy thing, I have a kind of a soft spot for privacy, but from a practical perspective, I know there is no such thing. I just want to invade the privacy of my elected representative as much as he invades my privacy as well. I want to go turn his camera on as well.
Well, I think that's where the transparency comes into play, because we kind of do need to know when people are making decisions for us, who are they talking to, what kind of backroom deals are they making, but that's why I have a hard time. I think we should have privacy. I don't have a problem with people having privacy, but when you're working on someone's behalf, it's kind of, we need to know what's going on.
Yeah. The other thing, and this is not really a libertarian, well, I guess it could be. It's just a step towards libertarian ideals in the present political system. And I don't know if you're in the U.S. or Canada. I keep pointing out I'm in Canada because most of the people I talk to online are American.
Yeah, I'm an American. I'm in Washington State, so.
I truly believe in, and this is going to sound like I'm being funny. I'm not. This is a complete 100% serious idea. I think elected politicians at any level, from municipal all the way up to the federal government, when they enter their office, in terms of, you got elected and now you're either the president or you're some member of parliament or you're the department head of whatever, when you leave your office, you need to take with you the debt that you created. Meaning, if you go in and you get elected president and you've got a federal deficit of, $50 trillion, and then you go out and your federal deficit is $60 trillion, that $10 trillion that you incurred during your term, you own that. That's yours now. Your family must pay that.
Well, it is funny, right?
No, it's not funny. This is for real. Because these cocksuckers, use my language, get to play fast and loose with other people's money and go, oh, well, sorry, you're in debt now. Bye.
Now, that's an interesting point. One thing I think we can get a little to, there is real resources that are created, right? Infrastructure, buildings, etc. So to say we have this infrastructure, but we're still paying off the capital. So they can't actually take the infrastructure they've built with the capital they spent. Okay, this is a devil's advocate argument of what you're saying.
Well, let me phrase it in smaller terms to make it more graspable. If you and I are neighbors, we live next to each other, okay? Like actually adjacent properties.
Okay.
And we knock down the fence between our two backyards,
yes,
so that our kids can have a bigger area to play in or whatever.
Right.
And I decide, you know what would be really cool is if we had a 65-meter tall ham radio tower, because we're both into ham radio, and that just is the coolest thing ever. And so I go and build a giant radio tower, and part of its footprint is in your backyard and part of its footprint is in mine. Okay. And certainly you can use the radio tower too. You can connect up your little ham set to it or whatever you want. And then I move and I leave you with the bill for that ham radio tower. Now you still have the ham radio tower, but what if I did all that without you saying, yes, go ahead and do that, and I'm going to, we're both in on this deal. We're both responsible for paying. What if I just arbitrarily said, by the way, I'm building a ham radio tower. You're going to love it. Here's the cable to connect your radio to. And you go, wait, I can't afford that. I'm still paying my mortgage off. No, it'll be fine. And I build it, and then I leave you with the bill. That's basically what the politicians do to us.
I mean, I see what you're saying. I can't, because we have goods and services that were created for the money that is owed. And in a sense, it was already spent, right? We've already spent the money. We pre-spent the money because it's a debt, right? And we have to pay off the goods and services that we've already received, which is the radio tower. So the thing is, if I wanted to, in theory, I could sell, if it was sellable. And that's half the problem, is you can't necessarily sell your tower because nobody wants it.
You can't sell that tower. You can only sell the tower if you can get all the people with an interest in it to agree that it's to be sold. Right?
Right.
And yes, there are goods and services provided, but what if a salesman comes to your door and says, "Hey, I got a really cool vacuum cleaner here. It's $1,000," and you go, "No, I don't want it. It's fine. I got hardwood floors. I don't need a vacuum." No, it's really great. Here you go, vacuum. So now you have a really nice vacuum and a bill, but you didn't want it. So, and in this model, you can't sell it because it belongs to everybody else too.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily hold the politician. I would hold all of the people that elected the politician. This is where accountability comes in. I think that's what you're driving at, is ultimate accountability. Because when you make a decision and it has problems, meaning there's a debt or whatever, and there's a long-term consequences for that, how do we deal with those consequences? I mean, how do we hold people accountable for their actions, to say, hey, look, that was a bad idea. You need to at least admit that was a bad idea. I mean, I see where you're going. I just don't know how to practically implement something like that.
Well, what this comes down to is collective decision making versus individual decision making.
Right.
Where a collective, meaning say the electorate in a certain region, and sometimes it's not the electorate. Sometimes there's a general mandate given to a politician. Say he gets in and says, "I'm going to make schools really good," and he doesn't say how. He doesn't say the details. Sort of like the Bernie Sanders deal right now. He's going to give everybody all this free stuff, and the people opposing him are going, "Well, how are you going to pay for it, Bernie?" He goes, "Oh, it'll be great. Don't worry." And then, of course, when you actually go create those services or spend that money, the people who were going, "Wait a minute, no, I don't. Wait, I don't want that bill." They still have to pay.
Right.
And that is, it's a weird psychological thing that we do as a society or as a species, where we don't seem to recognize that the objectors go, "No, I don't want that. Wait, stop spending my money." And they go, no, it'll be fine. And then, of course, then that guy becomes termed a criminal when he doesn't pay his tax bill. But he didn't want that money to be spent, and yet he's responsible for spending it. It's like having, your wife who has your credit card and has uncontrollable spending habits, and you have to keep paying the bill, but you can't complain. You married her.
No, there's that's accountability. And what I'm thinking in my head is, okay, you're right, of course. I mean, in the sense that when you spend something that you can't afford, and you know better, that's what you're saying. Some people know better not to spend, but how
you have the politician leaving his office with the debt that he created, which means that if he wants to spend some huge amount of money, he has to get a specific positive mandate to spend that money. Because if he doesn't, if he just goes wild ass like so many politicians do, and goes, "Yeah, well, sorry, I'm done now, bye."
Well, yeah, and that's accountability. And how do we put accountability in place as an initial step? I mean, I think we can agree, regardless of where you stand, is accountability is important, not just for us as society, but as individuals, because we don't know, we're not actually looking at something and seeing what the consequences of a policy is. And what I'm thinking about now is No Child Left Behind. There are consequences for doing that. I mean, it can be very disrupting to a classroom when you have a child that is not prepared to be in that classroom, right? So you have a dynamic. Yes, it would be better to have different classroom configurations, but you're basically, this one policy is making it difficult on every other person just because you can't find a safe place. No.
and No Child Left Behind is disastrous, like as an educational tool anyway. It's like it's horribly dysfunctional. Never mind the disruption that it creates on high achieving students or average students.
Well, it's not good for the child itself, who
Special.
needs a special environment, which is what you're
Exactly.
saying, right? Yeah, yeah. And so there's a policy that we're paying for again and again and again, and yet we didn't want the policy. We knew it was wrong, and so you don't have a means by which to say opt out of some policies, which need to be opt out of. You know, you need to say, hey, it's a great idea, but I don't want to be a part of it. If you want to try it, go for it. But
now I'm not sure what the law is in the U.S. in terms of school paying for school fees. I know that because I don't have kids, and Jesus, boy did I ever dodge a bullet there. But parents who homeschool their kids because they look at the present public education system and they go, that stinks. I'm just going to do it myself. Do they still have a financial onus to pay for the public schools in their district if they're not using them?
I almost went to homeschooling for my son this year. I gave him a choice. I said, look, you don't have to. There's some nasty things going on there. And I said, look, he's 9 years old. And I said, you know, you can go to school or you can stay home and we'll go through another program. And basically, yes, you have to pay for public education because it's a part of your
basic tax burden.
Your basic tax burden for owning a house. I mean, there's people on the road who own homes, but they don't have kids in school. But they're
paying too. Yeah,
they're paying for I mean, so you can look at that kind of burden. But then again, they get a benefit of having children around, because then if they need their lawns mowed, then there's a kid around, they can actually mow their lawn for an inexpensive rate. So we all kind of benefit with child rearing. Sort of one of those things. It's sort of a benefit to society. I mean, if we stop having kids, I mean,
you'll have to have illegal immigrants.
Yeah, right. So it's no longer going to be your country; it's going to be someone else's country pretty quick.
What I mean is they'll mow your lawn.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah. And maybe even cheaper than that spoiled brat kid down the street. Yeah. So yeah, you still have to pay, but you can get the online as well.
See, that seems totally grotesque to me. Just seems horrendous. And I'm surprised, actually, with the growth of the homeschool movement, that is not like a major election issue.
Well, the thing though too is the homeschooling, meaning that materials for homeschooling is provided for you for free because.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So you don't have to. So, for example, if I had put him in school, my son would have received a laptop, would have received all his schooling, and I wouldn't have to pay anything because the money that would have gone to the local school would have gone to this virtual school, who would then provide all the materials. And in fact, they even had teachers that would do coursework. It was a pretty interesting program, meaning because I think you're right. People have recognized, hey, look, we're required to educate our kids, but we want more control. And that's our money. We should be able to apply it in a way that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I am not too sympathetic with, I'm not sure what your religious beliefs are, and I'm not going to inquire, but I'll tell you mine. I'm not very sympathetic to the religious teachings in primary education of children. I think in terms of the public schools, I think if you're going to teach your children your religious views, do it in your home, no problem. Have a kid who's all, hot for Christ and all that stuff, or whatever other religion you happen to believe in. But when we come to the indoctrination of feminist beliefs, which is now happening in the public schools, to me, that's exactly the same argument as the atheist argument, which was happening 10 years ago about don't teach my kid your religion in the public school, which I have to pay for, right? Because you've got sort of communities which have probably 65%, maybe 70% Christian of some denomination, 5 to 10% no faith whatsoever. Maybe another 10% who are some version of the Islamic faith, and maybe some Hindu guys, and a little mix of this and that. It is, I think, incorrect to have all those kids going into public school, and then one of the particular faith is the one that gets taught, even if you are there as a Jewish kid and they're not teaching your Jewish stuff, or you're there as you're from a Hindu family and they're not teaching your the Hindu stuff, they're teaching the Christianity stuff that is the biggest part of your community. We now see that with feminist indoctrination, and to me, it's another religion.
It is.
And
it is.
But recognized as a secular movement, so they get away with shoving it down little kids' throats.
Well, and I think it comes back to the original point of people need to be more involved in the decision-making process. They simply say, well, I elect a person and that person takes care of me and takes care of my interest, when it's not a practical matter. I mean, the job of the mayor or the job of your elected official is actually to listen to the populace and make decisions based on what they want. I mean, a lot of decisions are kind of mundane. It's like, do you want a street light? Okay, we'll put a street light up.
Yeah.
Or do you want something else?
Yeah. Well, see, I think that a lot of people your wording actually revealed it. You said a politician to take care of you. And although that is a fairly common turn of phrase or thought construct, I think that's an insane idea.
It is.
That is totally off your rocker cuckoo, because they're not accountable to you in any direct way. And yet you're saying, oh, this guy's going to protect my security and my privacy, and he's going to make sure that this and that doesn't happen to me. Why would he?
Well, if we let it, we could let technology get rid of all our politicians, because I mean, if you think about their function, they don't hold the very, it's not very functional. It's very dysfunctional. It's a poor way of governing yourself based upon a few individuals that have their own personal opinions. And in our city here, it was interesting. The city, everyone in the city voted 57% to allow for marijuana sales in the cities, but the city council has banned any sales within the city limits, which limits their income, because the state says if you don't allow it in your city limits, you don't get any of the money from the marijuana sales, because there's statewide marijuana money that you would get if you allowed the sale of it.
Taxation stream?
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's almost heading towards a libertarian division of assets, isn't it? Like
right.
This compartmentalization of taxation again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ideals are actually filtering into it, and as people learn more and more about interactive models and how things can be self-correcting based on choice, I think more and more people are trying to institutionalize, because what happens is it does self-correct. If people aren't using it, then there's no money for it. Like if
in a libertarian model, but in a top-down model, then they'll just keep running that system because there's a bunch of administrators at the top who want to protect their empire.
Or to protect that particular pet project they have. Right. No, and so I think we could shift away from a total top-down model. I mean, that I actually
think we don't have a choice about shifting away from it.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Just that these large centralized distribution networks are becoming untenable. It's that they're going to fail catastrophically. They're going to collapse. What happens, and I had a conversation in a restaurant the other day about fiat money, about what happens when the debt burden that everybody carries using a government-issued fiat money is so onerous that people actually pay attention to it and say, wait a minute, I'm going to start transacting my business in a way to not use the fiat money which carries this burden for me. Like, distributors and manufacturers and resource producers, people who do, run machine shops, people who do sheet metal bending, people who ship timber or produce groceries. when they start finding ways to transact their business without going through the money system, because the money system puts this huge burden on them. It does already, but when the burden gets big enough that they start really noticing, then that top-down system fails, because it depends on everybody continuing to buy into it.
Well, that's money in general. I mean, it does depend on us believing there's value in that currency. I mean, that it's sort of an illusion to begin with.
Yeah, this dollar in my wallet is $1 because we all agree it is.
Right.
As soon as we stop agreeing, it's just a piece of paper.
Exactly. So yeah, I see that, and that can be interesting, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
I think it's going to be, and I think it's going to be a horrible disaster beyond the scope of anything we can imagine.
I hope not. I hope you're wrong about that. I'm going to be an optimist and just hope we kind of sail past it through massive abundance. But
maybe. The reason I think it's going to be bad, and I don't like, I really don't want to be right here. This is one of these things that, like, I don't want to be saying I told you so. I really don't, because it's going to be horrible. Is that any system that is not allowed to correct, that is not allowed to fail, like, you remember the 2008 banking crap, too big to fail?
Yes.
Well, instead of, those banks were private businesses, and they were irresponsible, and they gambled with debt consolidation of all these mortgages, which were stupidly issued because they wanted to get all these interest payments off poor people who couldn't afford the mortgages in the first place. And then, of course, these mortgages began to fail. So they packaged them into deals and played three-card Monte amongst the banks and sold them back and forth to each other. And then in 2008, somebody pulled the lid off and said, well, what's inside this bunch of collapsed mortgages? Oh, nothing. It's worth nothing.
Woo-woo.
Is you've got $1 trillion on your books, and when we open the lid, there's actually nothing inside it. And of course, instead of allowing the banks to collapse, which they should have done, we just pushed the problem down the road by bailing the banks out with public debt. So the debts in those banks, which were private, we're just going to move it over onto you and your kids. Enjoy your day. And the public didn't revolt. They didn't storm the Capitol buildings and lynch the politicians, which they should have.
Well, now I'm with you in that in so many ways. But the one thing that I kind of still have an open question about was, if you can generate $2 billion, and throw it, and then virtually do all they did, and then you look around, and then my dollar still goes and buys X, right?
That's because they bailed the banks out.
Right. Okay. So that tells me it's possible that there's an untapped bounty of money, that's just never been realized. Because if you think about what is money, how do we know there isn't value that we haven't created simply by generating money? And where's the best way to spend that money? Where's the best source to spend money?
Let me sort of back your question up a little bit and answer it, because you got a little abstract for me there. In that bailing out the banks, and they just took the debt from the bankers who were irresponsible, transferred it onto your kids or your grandkids if you have them, and said, yeah, there we go, you're fine, have a nice day. What they did is they increased the debt burden that your kids are born into. Okay, so your kid is, you said 9 years old?
Yeah.
So, your kid would have just been sort of starting to crawl around the house when that happened.
Yep.
And so guess what? We just moved this gigantic debt onto this little kid who certainly didn't incur it himself, and all the other little kids in your neighborhood and across the country and so on. And when they grow up and their income, they go to a job and they work, in a factory or in an office or whatever, flying a plane for Boeing or doing something interesting, every paycheck gets some taken off of it to service that debt that they didn't incur. And to me, it's a form of public insanity that the public doesn't go, wait a minute, why am I paying the debt of Bernie Sanders' kid when I wouldn't have got any of the profits if it had been a deal?
I don't think that's the way it went down. From what I did some research in it, and it's a little bit more strange than that, because the money there was no actual debt given because of what the purse strings are held by the monitor. I'm trying to. My brain is drawn to blank here. So the money is generated by a separate entity,
by the Federal Reserve.
The Federal Reserve. Thank you. Now they simply generated the money. Poof.
Yeah.
Okay. So we didn't pay anything for it. They just created it out of thin air.
Yeah.
Which they can do.
And then they
loaned it to the banks.
Yeah.
And then the banks pay the loan back somehow.
Over time, yeah.
Which have actually paid out. Most of those loans have been paid back.
Yeah, but so let's just reduce these numbers so that we can comprehend them and talk about them without it's just boggling our minds.
Right.
The Federal Reserve creates $100, and
Okay.
they actually create trillions of dollars, but just say 100 so keep it
Sure.
small. My little
Right.
pea brain can only handle so much.
Exactly.
They loaned that 100 to the 50 to some government organizations and the other 50 to banks. Okay, this is a loan. Now we're going to give this an arbitrarily high rate of interest so that we have something to work with here. The interest for a year on that $100 is $25. Okay, so over the period of the year, the banks and other institutions who were loaned that $100 pays the $100 back plus 25. So the Federal Reserve gets $125 back at the end of the year.
Right.
Where did the $25 come from? Because that's the only real money in this whole system.
Right.
The $100 is imaginary.
Right.
Interest is the actual value that gets created in the economy by private individuals who go out and cut down trees and make lumber out of it, or who, sell snow cones or do whatever.
Borrowing money from the bank.
Yeah. So the $25 is value produced by people doing work, turning rocks into metal and selling it to manufacturers or whatever, and having a little bit of their income taken away. So it's taken in their taxation and in interest payments on loans. So that $25, the interest on the imaginary $100 is the only real value.
Uh-huh.
And that, by the way, the taxation that gets taken away from them is to pay that big, huge, gigantic debt which was transferred from the banks to the public and all the other government incurred debt as well. And my view is that when the public, as you increase the amount of debt that you're servicing, the interest and the payment that you have to keep making to service that debt goes up. So the bigger your debt, the bigger the servicing of the debt.
But because the Federal Reserve did it, that's what's funny about it, because it's the magic money, right?
Yeah.
And you're right that it created money, but really the way I see that, the way that money was used was it was as sort of like a marker to say, we don't want you to go in debt. You need some liquidity. Here's this magical liquidity. Pay the liquidity back. Once you convince the public that everything that you said is worth X is still worth X. So in some ways, so move that money around, which I just thought was a way to move money around so they could keep the illusion of value.
When you say they don't want you to become illiquid, right? You're talking about the central money source, the Federal Reserve.
Right.
Or on behalf of them, the government saying, we don't want these major money institutions to become illiquid, because then the public will stop having faith in them and will stop using this fiat currency.
Right.
And what that really boils down to is the imaginary money, which produces interest, which is real money, will stop producing real money for these imaginary money makers. So if the banks collapse, if the money system collapses as it threatened to do in 2008, then it's not like people will stop making furniture and selling snow cones and driving groceries to the grocery store. It's just that they won't be doing all of that using money as the medium of their commerce. The money that they are using right now.
Right.
Now, it's not like they're just going to like, oh, well, I have this wallet full of American dollars. Just throw that in the garbage and I'll just go print up some new thing. They'll actually be doing the same transaction, buying, a bag of groceries. And instead of paying $50 for this bag of groceries, they'll have to pay $5,000 because the dollar is so degraded. Mm-hmm. Which then drives innovation in the market so that people will go, well, we've created a local currency here so that you don't have to do transactions in these degraded dollars. And then people can go back to having, a healthy commercial life in buying groceries or producing goods or, selling stainless steel appliances or whatever. It's the fear of the public leaving that currency that drives them to move the debt around and bail out the banks. And this is the great fear of large central government, the great terror of a lack of buy-in to this debt-producing machine. Because all the work that you do in whatever job you do, your taxes are to service a debt you didn't create. And as the debt increases, the servicing increases.
Yeah. I'm, in terms of the dollar, in terms of how that works, I will admit a little ignorance on that, because I think it's a little more, there's some magical stuff to it that there's a matter of confidence. And it's not magic in the true sense of the word magic, but it's more like
stage magic. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Penn and Teller. The better word is actually Penn and Teller.
Yeah. Well, the thing I realize though is if you think about it, money is a way of transferring information too. They're like micro contracts, right? It's a means by which to contract one another. And I think Bitcoin is sort of an interesting way of expanding on that idea. So you can sort of see how the trust in a currency is developed. So I think it's just an educational tool.
And eroded. There wouldn't be a Bitcoin if there wasn't a lack of trust in the central currency.
Right.
But of course, and I thought Bitcoin was really great at first. And I don't really have a lot of faith in it now because, there have been so many scandals inside of the Bitcoin world of like people disappearing millions of dollars out of keystrokes. So as much as it's a nice idea, it has shown that it's flaky, it's prone to glitches, and you can hack it, right?
Right.
It can be hacked into anything. Any lock a human can create, another human can pick.
Right.
And there's all kinds of Bitcoin advocates who are going to jump up and down and pull their hair and yell at me for saying that, but it's just encryption, and encryption can be broken.
Well, which is it's the idea of an open ledger, which is interesting, but just keeping a ledger is really what's important, that you have a ledger that can be reversed. And that's actually what keeps it from being, even though if you pick the lock, in theory, you can find out who picked the lock, but that's a whole nother story. But I think from an educational standpoint of how money is created, when they realize it's easy for people to see that that's a truly fictitious currency, right?
Yeah.
Meaning it's just made out of thin air, and it's good for people to see
exactly as real as the dollars we're using now.
Well, yes, but see, we don't realize that. I've had that argument with people. It's like, look, but it's backed up with the military. Well, there's some truth to that too,
So you mean I've written a number on a note and I have a gun?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, if you don't honor it, I'll shoot you.
Yes. That doesn't make the money more real. It just makes you more of a jerk.
Well, it maintains. You might as well believe in the illusion. I guess
you don't.
I'll shoot you.
I'm the best magician in the world.
Yeah.
This is a Volkswagen.
Yeah, I agree.
Hey!
All right. So yeah, well, it's interesting, nevertheless. So we'll see how things work out. But it's
Anyway,
good.
I'm running a little short on time here.
Yeah, I was going to say
Yeah.
I need to get it going too. So I just want to thank you for the time you spent on this. It was interesting. It was more productive than I thought. So
Cool. Anyway, we'll talk again.
all right, take care, John. Bye.
Bye.